Hello guys and welcome back to Sauti Briefs, where we discuss current conservation topics in Kenya and Africa. I'm your host Natasha Nyangara, and before we proceed with today's episode, a gentle reminder to follow us on our social media pages so that you keep up to date with all our upcoming content and ongoing programs. In the meantime, let's do this. Kenya and her sister African states are among nations that are worst affected by climate change, environmental degradation, and various forms of pollution. Climate change is driving more extreme weather, while pollution and degradation are threatening the existence of Kenya's 8 major ecosystem types. Plastic, agricultural, and industrial pollution from both individuals and corporations in Kenya continue to have adverse effects on the productivity of agricultural land, safety of water sources, the socio-economic activities and health of Kenya's citizens. Over the past decade, Kenyan authorities have made considerable efforts to restore and protect the natural environment through tree planting, recovery of water bodies, and awareness campaigns. While laudable strides have been made through these exercises, the Environment and Land Court, ELC, is now urging Kenyans to take more legal action against companies or individuals whose operations contribute to climate change and environmental degradation. This is aimed at preventing further harm to the country's natural ecosystems and to mitigate the effects of climate change. According to Justice Anthony Ombwayo of the ELC, Kenya is one of the few African countries with climate change and environmental protection laws that Kenyans can use to seek legal redress. He, however, noted with regret that the ELC is handling more land-related litigation than environmental conservation cases because the public has not been effectively educated on their right to file environmental lawsuits. Article 42 of the Constitution provides that everyone has the right to a clean and healthy environment, which includes the right to have the environment protected for the benefit of current and future generations through legislative and other measures. Article 70 further enforces this by stating that if a person alleges that a right to a clean and healthy environment has been infringed or threatened, the person may apply to a court of law for redress in addition to any other legal remedies available. Some of these other remedies are available through domestic and international legislations, conventions, and human rights laws, especially when the health, culture, and safety of the citizenry is at risk. Taking legal measures against environmental offenders not only holds these individuals and corporations accountable for their actions, but also provides citizens affected by devastating environmental impacts with the opportunity to seek compensation for injuries, damages, and related deaths. Whether or not some of these cases succeed, Justice Ombwayo believes the move will bring environmental issues into the larger public space and political discourse, influencing public, corporate, and government attitudes towards natural resource conservation and climate change mitigation. Filing legal suits in court also allows for precedents on environmental crimes to be set through the decisions of presiding judges that will ultimately strengthen Kenya's laws and judicial system and help us to improve the formation of environmental laws of the country and make them suitable according to the situations. On the 16th of July 2020, Kenya achieved a milestone in environmental justice. The Land and Environment Court in Mombasa awarded $13 million in compensation to the residents of the Owino Uhuru settlement in Kenya for the devastating impacts on the environment and the health of the community caused by lead poisoning from a nearby smelter that recycled batteries. The decision came 4 years after the Center for Justice, Governance and Environmental Action filed a class action lawsuit initiated by activist Phyllis Omido on behalf of the residents of Owino Uhuru. In this case, the two companies responsible for the pollution, together with the Kenyan government, were ordered to pay damages for their negligence and for the approval of the project, respectively. The Law Society of Kenya and community-based organizations have been urged to be solution agents by seeking legal remedies against environmental offenders that contribute to the climate change crisis and force change on behalf of the Kenyan society, especially on behalf of the communities that cannot afford the legal fees to pursue such cases. And now we ask you, our dear audience, what do you think about this approach to environmental justice? Do you think it is a viable solution to climate change in Kenya? Let us know your thoughts in the comment section below. Now let's shift gears and talk about climate finance in relation to indigenous African communities. Although climate change affects everybody, it does not affect everyone equally, with poorer communities, women, children, and indigenous people all projected to be the most vulnerable as the century advances. Indigenous people who rely directly on natural resources are suffering from some of the most severe consequences of climate change, such as droughts, floods, storms, and wildfires, but who bear the least responsibility for causing it. In fact, indigenous peoples and local communities are on the front lines of climate change in Africa and around the world, and are hands-on in preserving vital ecosystems. Despite this, there is a limited financial support directed towards assisting local communities to mitigate the effects of climate change and develop adaptation measures. Climate funding is unequally distributed around the world. Between 2016 and 2019, Africa received only 26% of available climate financing. 3/4 of that was in the form of repaid loans and other non-grant instruments. Further, indigenous people, local communities, and organizations receive less than 1% of the climate funding globally, while African organizations receive only 5 to 10% of private philanthropic funding invested in Africa. Many conservationists are of the opinion that the system is designed to favor the larger organizations while ignoring the true needs of grassroots organizations that are striving to support indigenous communities. As the effects of climate change worsen, vulnerable countries, particularly those on the African continent, will be hit hard. Globally, the least developed countries have the fewest resources to plan, finance, and implement adaptation measures, but bear the greatest cost in terms of their economies. While climate financiers frequently talk about prioritizing the most vulnerable countries, vulnerability is not a deciding factor in where the funds are directed. South Africa, for example, received the most multilateral climate financing on the continent and ranks 6th amongst the most affected countries globally. Mozambique, Zimbabwe, and Malawi were the world's first, second, 5th most affected countries in 2019. Nonetheless, in terms of climate financing received, they were ranked 32nd, 108th, and 75th, respectively. In Africa, finance tends to flow to areas where donors have a presence, as well as to areas with strong institutional capacity to carry out projects. Investors seek predictable environments in which to generate returns and are hesitant to invest in areas with weak institutional and market structures. Unfortunately, indigenous communities often do not have these capacities on their own, and the support that they receive from capable organizations and institutions is often insufficient to enable them to adapt to climate change and environmental challenges. Infrastructure and capacity building to attract increased climate finance at the community levels is often not considered urgent in light of other national priorities. Further, in many cases, funds are lost to corruption long before they reach their beneficiaries at the grassroots level. Encouragingly, some African countries are making an attempt to support indigenous communities with the limited climate finance available. Most notably in Namibia over the last 3 decades, the integrated rural and development nature conservation has helped local communities secure their legal rights to manage their own natural resources, resulting in the restoration of vast areas of land and the protection of wildlife and increased climate security. The area dedicated to the conservation areas, owned and managed by local people who live alongside wildlife, has grown to approximately 16 million hectares, which is larger than the entire country of Greece. These conservancies earn nearly $10 million per year, making conservation an important part of economic development, enabling local communities to better adapt to rapid climate change. As we come to the end of this episode, we'd like to give a special shout out to Dr. Gladys Kalema for being one of the 3 winners of the Talberg Global Leadership Prize. Dr. Kalema is the first Ugandan wildlife vet doctor and the executive director of the Conservation Through Public Health NGO. This award is an addition to her numerous accolades for her persistent innovation, leadership in developing new approaches to human-wildlife interaction. Congratulations, Dr. Gladys Kalema. Thank you for joining us on this week's episode. If you have any questions about the topics discussed or would like to give some feedback on our videos, feel free to engage with us in the comment section below or send us a direct message at Uvumbuzi Africa on any of our socials. From me, it's Asante. Until next time.